Hello comrades, and welcome to day 5 of the founding conference of the Revolutionary Communist International. Now this session is on so-called right populism and how to fight it. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about populism. Ursula von der Leyen recently, after the European elections, was warning about the growth of the so-called extreme right and extreme left. We have Meloni in Italy, Trump in the US, AfD in Germany. And there are worries amongst some people about the growth of what they describe as fascism. But we as communists, we need to understand what is causing this phenomenon and how do we fight it. Now today we've got Yola Kipchak, who will answer this question. She is a leading member of the Revolutionary Communist International in Austria. Now you may have noticed I'm pausing regularly. This is to allow our thousands of comrades all over the world who are following online to allow them to hear the translation. Now Yola will speak for about 1 hour and 30 minutes. Then we'll take a 30-minute break and there'll be plenty of time for contributions and questions. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to Yola.
This is what you meant, okay. Right. Okay, yeah. As Jack has already said, in the last years and months, we've seen in many countries around the world how right-wing so-called populist parties and politicians are gaining support. In polls and also winning some important elections. In the US, the most powerful country in the world, Donald J. Trump is very likely to win a second term as a president this November. In Argentina, Javier Milei became president last year. He's this outlandish figure that calls himself an anarcho-capitalist. And he was carrying a literal chainsaw during his election campaign. As a symbol of how he wants to massacre the public sector. And last week, the elections to the European Parliament took place, where right-wing parties together now make up the second largest bloc in the EU Parliament. Put together because they're also divided in two blocks. But the true bombshell was that because of the EU elections, France's president has now called for snap elections. Macron's party was completely defeated, with a landslide victory for the far-right party of Marine Le Pen. And with this defeat, Macron dissolved the National Assembly on the same day. And on the 30th of June, and after, there will be legislative elections in France now. In Germany, the Alternative for Germany, or AfD, is gaining in all the polls. It's a party whose main EU candidate recently said in an interview not everyone in the Nazi SS was a criminal. And the AfD is probably the most unhinged of all these right-wing parties in Europe. With lots of internal struggles and the least control over their own apparatus and members. And in 3 important regional state elections this fall, or this year, they will likely come in first place, which will create a big political crisis and undermine the already extremely unpopular so-called progressive government made up of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals. But there's also Giorgia Meloni, who is Italy's prime minister since 2022. She's the leader of the Brothers of Italy, that has his roots in the fascist camp after Mussolini. There's also Viktor Orban, who is still running Hungary. The Islamophobe Geert Wilders won the elections in the Netherlands last November. There are gains of right-wing parties, amongst others, in Spain with Vox, in Portugal with Chega, in Belgium with Vlaams Belang, and in Austria, where the Freedom Party will most likely come in first in the general election this fall, very likely. So we can really see how the political center is really melting away around the world. And in this deep crisis of capitalism, there is a deep discontent and anger developing. And right-wing parties in a number of countries, though by far not everywhere, are gaining from this. And there are many young workers and youth who are extremely worried about this phenomenon. So they hate the racist, anti-immigration, anti-LGBT, and the misogynist agenda of these right-wing parties. And then some are even worried that we might be on a slippery slope towards fascism. And we want to defeat them. But for that, we need to understand where these successes of the right come from. We have to have a clear class analysis of what's happening. We have to look at these phenomena with a sense of proportion in order to give a correct, communist perspective of how to fight the right. I say communist perspective because the bourgeoisie is also, the ruling class is complaining about the right wing and even try to fight them a bit. There are millions of articles and papers against the right-wing populism, as they call it. But the reason why the ruling class doesn't particularly like these so-called populists is not the same as ours. They don't like them because they see them as a danger to the stability of their capitalist system. Populism is not a Marxist term. It's a bourgeois term with no class analysis behind it. It's a bourgeois, it's a concept that looks at parties and political phenomena simply from the point of view of what's good for bourgeois stability. And that's why the bourgeois so-called political scientists also have no clear definition of what this populism is actually precisely. They will take more or less random, superficial characteristics like they put the people against the elite, or they deny climate change. And then they would look at these politicians with a sort of checklist. Which is a very empiricist method and approach that only sees phenomena in isolation and doesn't have an insight into the deeper processes that are happening. They have no class analysis and no dialectical understanding of society, as Marxists do. And this is why they lump together as populism completely qualitatively different phenomena. From Hitler's fascism to Le Pen, and then even left reformists like Jeremy Corbyn or Podemos or Bernie Sanders, that they then call left populists. And this is also the same mistake that left sectarians often make, where they try to fit phenomena in a checklist of like, these are the fascist characteristics, check, check. And they put like a schema on the real world. Which is why when they see a victory of a right-wing party, something with the media, it's like, fascism is coming. Which which confuses honest young people and workers who want to understand this phenomenon. And this is completely unscientific and veils the real state of things. Instead of explaining them. So which is why we have to look at the fundamental processes that are taking place in society. We have to uncover the class relations in society and how they change. And then we will also be able to interpret and understand superficial or like phenomena on the surface, such as election results or parties becoming popular. And we have to look concretely how the relations between the classes develop in each country. What this does to the regimes, the parties, and the state. Like Trump is not quite the same as Orban in Hungary. The AfD is not quite the same as Vox in Spain. And as Trotsky said, in a similar, like in a very turbulent period of the 30s, he said, in a period of acute social conflict, of rapid political shifts, of abrupt changes in the situations, political conceptions and generalizations are rapidly used up. And the truth is always concrete. But still, having said that, all these right-wing demagogues are part of the same process. And there are similarities that we can draw out. But for that, we have to understand the deep, profound, objective processes and the deep crisis of capitalism that lies behind it. So any class society is built on a fundamental contradiction. A minority in society, the ruling class, oppresses the majority. But it needs to make the majority accept this fact. And in bourgeois democracy, the ruling class even relies on the oppressed majority voting for their oppressors. So as Lenin phrased it, every few years we get to vote which members of the ruling class is to repress and crush the people through parliament. And the ruling class has developed a very intricate mechanism of how to make the majority accept their exploitation. Keeping the illusion of equality, of free elections where you can actually change something, seemingly neutral institutions like the courts, ideological pillars like the media and the schools. But fundamentally, the stability of class rule relies on the material stability of a society. The masses have to have the feeling that life is going okay. Maybe it's even improving a bit. And for decades, this was the case in many, many countries around the world. Capitalism was stable, more or less. There was stability, some growth, and the ruling class even was able to give some concessions to the workers to appease them. But not anymore. Capitalism is in an organic, deep crisis. And especially since the crisis of 2008, the working class has experienced one shock after the other. So everyone sees this extreme rise in inequality. There are attacks on the living standards, falling wages and inflation. But really everything around us is just rotting away. They see these extremely bloody wars, such as in Gaza. The biggest war in Europe since World War in Ukraine. There was the pandemic, keeping school students locked for 2 years at home. There's the climate catastrophe. And the working class and the youth sees that life is not getting better. It's not doing okay. But on the contrary, it's getting worse. And there's huge anger and discontent that is growing in the hearts of millions of people. So instead of reforms and concessions, we see cuts and austerity. And in this deep crisis, the screws of this intricate mechanism of bourgeois democracy get loosened one after the other. The safety mechanisms of class rule are becoming less and less effective. Ordinary people begin to question the system they live in. They begin to question all their beliefs they have grown up with, all the ideals they learn in school. And in short, the crisis of capitalism is also the crisis of democracy. Fundamentally, the crisis of democracy is the process in which the oppressed classes start seeing through the conditions that enslave them. And when the means to keep them down don't work as in the past. And these are actually perfect conditions for class struggle, right? To take the accumulated anger and against the attacks of the capitalists. And actually, this is also what is happening. There is only the rise of the right wing we see. After the crisis of 2008, after the initial shock especially, workers and youth were the way out. Class further increased. We saw big strike movements increase, I don't know, 48 general strikes or something in the period in the 2010s. And where the workers and youth perceived a chance of change, unbelievable like a way forward. They flushed up new left parties and leaders to the top. We saw the rise of Podemos in Spain, of Syriza in Greece, of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, of Mélenchon in France, Sanders in the US, and so on. But these reformists were not willing to break with capitalism. They were not willing to even take a decisive offense against the capitalists. Sometimes they gave even up before anything could happen, like Corbyn. So instead of profit, went to the pressure. And they betrayed all of these movements and this mood of enthusiasm. And I mean, here I'm just talking about the left or lefty reformists that started somewhat of a fight in a way and then capitulated. But the right reformists don't even do that. That the current German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, he's a social democrat who always complains about the right-wing AfD, aren't they racist and bad? But he made all the headlines last December when he demanded big-time deportations of migrants. And his government fully supports the war in Ukraine, as well as the genocide in Palestine. And this social democrat is now pushing for the biggest militarization of Germany since the Second World War. While implementing cuts for the masses. And on the industrial front as well. If the trade union leaders actually gave a perspective to fight back against the attacks, for higher wages and against mass sackings where they happen, in some countries they do right now, they could cut through all the racist right-wing demagoguery. Instead, these trade union leaders, they only offer up one crappy deal after the other. So these reformists inspire no confidence, and they create no enthusiasm whatsoever. And this is this huge vacuum that leaves room for the right-wing demagogues to rise. There would be no Trump without the betrayal of Sanders. The complete of the social. There would be no Millet without his predecessors that buckled under the pressures of the IMF loans. And so on. So actually, we can say that the reformists carry the largest responsibility for the rise of the right wing. And therefore we should not make the mistake to think that this is like a deep-seated right-wing turn amongst the workers, like a deep process. And we shouldn't mimic the sectarians and the petty bourgeois lefts. That all the workers are a lost case. that they're all forever racists and reactionaries now. This is wrong. In a way, the successes of right-wing demagogues are a distorted reflection of the anger and radicalization that is taking place. So some workers in this situation are already drawing the conclusion from the failures of left reformism and the crisis. And getting more radicalized to the left. They're becoming communists. But that is still a minority. The majority of the working class is still testing out, desperately looking for an answer or solution. And in absence of a believable working class alternative, this also includes high abstentions in many elections, or voting right-wing parties, often just as a protest vote, against all the established parties. Because the right-wing demagogues, they claim to fight against the elite. Of kicking them all out. Trump's electoral campaign our populist movement to make America great again against the failed establishment. And one of the in Austria is we together against the system. Real problems in society. The Austrian Freedom Party is the only party criticizing the Ukraine war, linking it to the high energy costs that I think he's the best really. He's a fantastic orator, and his favorite philosopher is actually Hegel. Yeah, so, and these right-wingers, they even often raise some social, like pro-working class demands. Especially so long as they are in opposition and don't have to deliver. Like Marine Le Pen promises an increase of small pensions, a wage rise for healthcare workers and teachers, and 100,000 new social housing units per year. I would vote for that. Yeah. But of course they combine these with racist, anti-migrant demands, such as jobs for our own people, no access to benefits unless you have citizenship, and stuff like that. But putting the blame not on the capitalists, but firmly on the doubly and triply oppressed minorities in society. And this is, of course, completely reactionary, because it divides the working class. And this is the reason why we as communists oppose these reactionaries. We don't have a moralistic approach to them, like it's my duty as an anti-fascist to hate them. Our reason for fighting the right-wing demagogues is because they are precisely not fighting against the elites. On the contrary, they want to become part of the elite. The only way to fight against the actual elite, the capitalist class, is through a united class struggle. But the right-wing demagogues are constantly dividing the working class, spewing racism, homophobia, scapegoating migrants for all problems in society, distracting from the real root of problems. And while they demagogically appeal to like individual workers to vote for them, they're anti-trade unions and rabid anti-communists. Yes. So our slogan must be, if you want better living conditions, if you want to solve your problems, don't kick out migrants, kick out the capitalists. But as the capitalist crisis is not solved, the crisis of democracy also deepens. The ruling class is not able to rule as in the past, and splits open up within the ruling class. The rule becomes more erratic. And whenever the ruling class tries to make capitalism stable again, they're actually making it more unstable. All the things the liberals are criticizing about the right wing are actually things they are doing themselves in one way or another. So in other words, the right-wing demagogues are actually the spawn of this reasonable politics of the center. They're the product of it. They are the result of the failure of center politics and the status quo. But I said populism is not a Marxist term. But we should try to understand this phenomenon a bit better. So the ruling class don't like them, they are afraid of them, because these right-wingers play with the huge polarization in society. This is playing with fire. They fear that this could rouse the masses, either in support of them, such as the storm of the Capitol in 2021, when Trump supporters broke into the Congress building, but also against them. I mean, the ruthlessness of Milei's attacks in Argentina has created a huge counter-reaction, including general strikes and steering the masses into action. So this kind of activity of the masses is something the ruling class wants to avoid at all costs. But if we look around the world, all these supposedly reasonable center politicians are also enraging the masses all the time. Just look at this genocide in Gaza, supported by all mainstream parties. Macron has provoked several mass movements. most prominently the Yellow Vests in 2018, and the strikes against the pension counter-reform. In the crisis of capitalism, the ruling class is forced to attack the working class in order to save the profits. And these attacks will only become harsher in the next period. And it will produce mass anger, the same thing they warned about the right wing. The ruling class also doesn't like the right-wing demagogues because they're often political outsiders. They're untested. They're not part of the political clique, groomed and honed to the system. Or even worse, they try to get into the system and try to snack away like positions and jobs from the old cliques. They have unpredictable political stances that don't always align with the interests of finance capital. Because they're not so tightly bound to this intricate network of those. So the ruling class fears that they will be harder to control. I mean, we just have to think how the Republicans in the US tried to find a Trumpism without Trump candidate. A person that would do the exact same politics in the public, but was from their inner circle. But the problem is that parties do have to win elections. And the center politics is hated by more and more people. The same old faces are hated by more and more people. And then there's a general tendency of politicians becoming more demagogic, trying to win over voters. In the UK and the US, big finance capital has in effect lost control over the most important, like, traditional parties. Well, in the US they have two of those, but it was the Tories that led Britain into Brexit. And they have chosen one incompetent leader after the other since. So the capitalists watch with horror that their own personnel is getting more incompetent and unpredictable by the day. So demagogic, reckless politicians are not an accidental feature of this epoch. They are the result of democracy in crisis. But particularly in the EU. The different nation states are already completely divided, basically. Because the different bourgeoisies and nation states all have diverging interests. And now the ruling class is worried that nationalistic right-wing parties will create even more of a political deadlock in the EU. They want to especially ensure that everyone follows a 100% anti-Russia line, which parties like the AfD or Viktor Orban are not doing. But Meloni is doing it, which is now why she's not longer a right-wing extremist or populist in their eyes. She's very reasonable. So the Austrian president, actually, Alexander van der Bellen, has said that we really have to evaluate whether she's post-fascist. Because after all, she's pro-EU. But these kind of nationalistic politics in the EU are not a speciality of the right wings exactly. They're rooted in the fierce capitalist competition between the nation states in the EU. And these splits will deepen in the future, no matter which party rules in the different countries in the end. So another thing that the ruling class doesn't appreciate about these anti-establishment demagogues is that they treat conventions, traditions, and institutions with contempt. Thus undermining their credibility. I mean, Trump has openly raged against the fake news media. And he openly contested election results. But in trying to combat this right wing, the ruling class with the mainstream parties, the media, and their institutions are doing the exactly same thing. They shamelessly use the media for their propaganda. And they also use the judiciary, throwing lawsuits against these populists. Trump faces, I believe, 57 felony charges. And at least 4 big federal trials coming up. He was recently convicted of 34 charges in a case about paying hush money to a porn actress. Which makes him the first former American president convicted for a crime and the first convicted felon who will likely become president again in November. But the truly astonishing thing is that no other of these criminals has ever been convicted, right? So this is completely unprecedented, though. The ruling class is weaponizing the state apparatus to sort out the fights amongst each other, completely laying bare the true character of these institutions to millions of eyes. I mean, in Germany, they have started investigating the AfD for bribery from Russia and China. And they conveniently also found an actual Chinese spy in the staff of one of them. And at the beginning of the year, all the mainstream parties, including the reformists, the trade unions, the Bosses Federation, even the churches, they have tried to really organize rallies against the AfD to save democracy. And at the same time, they're discussing whether there's some legal way to outlaw the AfD. So with these rallies, they have just openly shown their hypocrisy. They really hope to create a big national unity and enthusiasm for their own parties. And the first demonstrations were quite big. But this national unity immediately broke down on the question of Palestine. And these demonstrations became very small very quickly. So to the ruling class's dismay, their plans to bring back center politics and to damage the popularity of the right is completely failing. On the contrary, with their methods, they only further destabilize their own system and actually strengthen the right wing. I mean, after Donald Trump's conviction, he immediately went out, proclaimed himself a political prisoner, and his campaign shattered its own fundraising record on the next day. With almost $35 million raised, with many small donations of normal people. And similarly, Le Pen, the Freedom Party in Austria, the AfD, they're not defeated at all. Instead, we see how all the democratic institutions, the courts, the parties, the media, they're all losing trust. In the US, in 2023, only 27% have confidence in the Supreme Court. And really, of all the institutions they asked, Congress enjoys an amazing 8% of confidence. It's right at the bottom of all of these institutions. These are amazing numbers. Numbers like this can be replicated in most countries. In a similar trend, even though it's not as low as in the US everywhere. So this shows how the crisis of democracy is deepening, how the political center is melting away, how polarization and anger are growing, and the consciousness of the masses is shaped by constant shocks and blows, which is preparing under the surface huge explosions of class struggles in the future, which is a very good thing from our point of view. But we have to draw very clear conclusions from all what I've said. First, the bourgeoisie and all their liberal and reformist supporters are incapable of fighting against the right. On the contrary, they are strengthening them with their actions. And secondly, we have to draw a clear line of demarcation between the liberals and us, because their reasons for claiming to be against the right are not the same as ours. They fight the right to keep the working class oppressed and quiet and peaceful. But we fight the right to strengthen and activate the working class. They fight the right because it is dividing their own bourgeois ranks. And we don't mind at all if the capitalists are fighting amongst each other. But we fight the right because they're dividing the working class. The liberals want to save capitalism, to go back to old times, which is impossible and a complete utopia. But we fight the right with class struggle. We fight the root of what makes them rise in the first place, which is capitalism. And we want to go forward to the future, to socialism. Now, because of the successes of the right wing, there are many honest young workers and youth who are worried that this means we're heading in the direction of fascism. And so it's important to say that this is not what's happening here. Fascism is a specific form of capitalist rule. It's the last desperate resort of capitalists saving the system from being overthrown by the proletariat. Fascism is when finance capital uses like a mass movement mainly composed of petty bourgeois and lumpens as shock troops to destroy completely any collective organization of the working class. And I think we often say that fascism bases itself on the middle classes and the petty bourgeoisie. And we don't just say it because we saw it in the 30s. There's a reason for it. Because the working class are the ones that can defeat capitalism. If they act together in a mass movement, it endangers the capitalists. So they need a mass of people that does not challenge the rule. So in fascism, they used armed gangs to wipe out trade unions, illegalize any workers' parties, and install a regime of brutal dictatorship to hinder and keep down any collective expression of the working class. Keep them individualized and atomized. But this is not the preferred option for the capitalists. And most of all, this is not something the capitalists can just decide to do. Not any politician or any party or even the whole ruling class can just decide to install fascism. In the 30s, it took a series of historical, deep defeats of the proletariat. The deep defeat of several German revolutions. The Italian revolutionary movement, the Austrian Revolution in 1918, later on the Spanish Revolution, before the fascists were able to rise and take power. And even then, the bourgeoisie was extremely worried that they would lose everything in this process. They were very worried about provoking a civil war against the proletariat, that they were not sure they could win. I mean, in Austria, they had to wait 16 years after the revolution of 1918 waiting until the social democracy with their reformism had completely demoralized the working class. Before they were able to build an extremely unstable, very weak half-fascism, the so-called Austro-fascism in 1934. In Britain, they never managed to do it. And what is the situation today if we look at it? The middle classes and petty bourgeoisie, which could form a mass basis for fascism, layers that were previously supporters of fascism, such as teachers, doctors, students. Today they have become proletarianized and are often the ones who are on the forefront of strike movements. The working class is a hugely powerful potential force that the ruling class fears. I mean, the US right now can't even send ground troops to any of the foreign wars because they fear mass opposition at home. Just imagine if they tried to send these troops against their own workers. And, actually, during this election campaign, both Trump and Biden felt obliged to visit striking auto workers, although Biden was careful to choose a non-unionized car factory, to garner their support and vote. And Trump was not going there to shoot them. And we have already seen some of these right-wingers in office, in practice. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump, the Law and Justice Party in Poland, Meloni in Italy, the Freedom Party in Austria. None of these countries have become fascist. All these right-wing demagogues turn out to be very reactionary, but ultimately normal bourgeois leader in the current context of the world, as normal as you can be. Well, a bit edgy, but like not fascism. Even Bolsonaro, who maybe dreamed of becoming a dictator, he was not able to do so. His government was weak and unstable. And this is in line with the general process of this capitalist crisis. Unstable, shaky regimes that can only hold themselves up because of this lamentable role of the reformist leaders, trade union leaders, the party leaders. So most of all, we have to see at what stage of the process of capitalist crisis we're at. The working class has not at all been defeated. There were some defeats, but not like full destructive defeats. Overall, on the contrary, the working class is only just starting to move. we're not at the end of a revolutionary period or process, but at the beginning. So to create a mass panic of rising fascism would be a complete misjudgment of the situation and would lead communists to make serious mistakes that would completely distract and hinder us from the work that revolutionaries actually have to do right now. If we were serious about fascism, what we would have to do right now is starting immediate preparation to arm the working class, prepare for civil war. But just imagine going to work as in Germany or Austria or the US today and telling them that they need to start doing militia training and procuring weapons. This would completely alienate us from the best workers. And they would correctly think that we were crazy. The perspective that we're facing around the world today is one of rising class struggle in the coming period. This is what we have to prepare for. And this is why we need to urgently build the forces of revolutionary communism. So the title of the talk is Right Populism and How to Fight Them. So how do we fight the right today in the present situation? And I've, with good reason, spent a lot of time in explaining the deep crisis our system is failing. How the crisis of capitalism is the crisis of democracy and the crisis of reformism, which is creating the conditions for the right wing to rise. And this approach always has to be our starting point. We have to have a clear understanding of the objective situation. What are the class relations at present? Where is the process going and at what stage in this process are we? What are the specifics in the country where I'm politically active? I mean, I've given an overview here, but there are specifics in every country. And if we get the objective analysis wrong, we will draw completely wrong conclusions for our practical work. So, we have the deepest crisis of capitalism in its history, of which the rise of the right wing is only one expression. The direction moving towards class struggle and revolution. But we cannot be impatient with the working class. We cannot write them off when there is a momentary swing to the right. Yes, but of course we're communists and we're not mere commentators. We don't stop at analyzing the situation. We must actively intervene in the class struggle and also in the fight against the right. But here the most important thing is that we have a clear class position. We start, of course, with saying we completely reject the reactionary agenda of the right wing. Because they divide the working class and sow hatred. We say no to racism, sexism, Islamophobia, and so on. We say kick the capitalists out, not refugees. But if the working class fought back on a class basis against not only the right, but like the social problems they face, the workers face, these right-wing demagogues would have nothing to offer. They would just crumble. And we have to be very clear that our reasons to fight the right wing have nothing in common with the hypocritical liberals. that they claim to be against the right, but actually just defend the same system that gave rise to the right in the first place. We are against the unity with liberals and the bourgeoisie. We reject lesser evilism, where the liberals try to chain the working class to the bourgeoisie. I mean, we don't endorse Joe Biden just because we don't like Trump. We don't support the Greens just because they claim to be more left. Yes. We also criticize the criminal policy of the reformists, where they use the control they have over the workers' organization to subordinate the working class under the bourgeoisie. And when they claim to fight the right, they just parrot the liberals, instead of standing on a clear class position against the capitalists. So we need to explain what the actual tasks of the leaders of the working class should be and are. And at the moment, we're too small to pose an alternative to the leadership of the current working organization. We cannot replace them, and sometimes not even seriously challenge them in practice, most of the time. But we should use opportunities when we get them, to show in practice how it makes a difference to fight the right with a working class approach, and prove that we have the correct ideas. And these chances will come more often as we become a bigger force. And this is important because the revolutionary process is only at its beginning and not at its end. But we do not have endless time on our hands. We live in a revolutionary period of world history. And revolutions do not wait for us to be ready. We really have the question of a successful socialist revolution in our lifetime before us. And we have to make sure that it can succeed. Which is why we have to grow urgently and build the revolutionary communist international. Because ultimately, only the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism can really start to root out all the forms of oppression and hatred, and get rid of the root of what makes the right wing rise. We fight for the full emancipation of all humankind, for communism, and for a successful revolution in our lifetime. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Yola. I think we can all agree that was a fantastic introduction. Now, we are about to break for 30 minutes, but beforehand I have some announcements. Now, if you enjoyed Yola's talk and would like some further reading, especially those watching from home, I would like to recommend the manifesto of the Revolutionary Communist International. This is an excellent political document which really can arm us all in this struggle that Yola laid out. You can find it by going to Marxist.com. and click on the link in the top left-hand corner of the home page. Now, after the break, we'll have a discussion. There's plenty of time for questions and contributions. But before we go to the break, I'd like to remind anyone who has symptoms of COVID, you must go and get a test from the medical station outside the main hall. So, we will now break for 30 minutes. If anyone would like to contribute, please come and tell me your name and section. Thank you. Okay. Okay, and welcome back to the conference of the Revolutionary Communist International. Could someone phone Arturo? Oh, Antonio. Antonio, need to make a start. Would you be able to translate? Could you translate? Okay. Okay, welcome back, and sorry for that slight technical problem. We've got plenty of time for discussion now. First, I will bring in Bryce from the United States, and then Johannes from Brazil. Comrades will have 15 minutes to contribute.
Well, for a temporary period after World War II, American workers were in a relatively good position. There was a significant upswing for U.S. capitalism, which lasted almost 3 decades. Jobs were plentiful and real wages were rising. And several generations of workers became accustomed to this. So this period ended in the mid-1970s. And since then, American capitalism has been in a period of protracted decline. To get a sense of this, we can look at the manufacturing industry in the US. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 19.6 million manufacturing jobs in 1979. That fell by 35% down to 12.8 million by 2019. And that's an even larger loss if you factor in the overall, the growth of the total US population since the 70s. This same report also notes that since 1979, employment in that sector fell during each of 5 recessions that have occurred. And in each case, employment never fully recovered to pre-recession levels. And that, of course, has a ripple effect on other jobs and industries. Concretely speaking, this means that many towns and smaller cities have been completely gutted. And real wages and conditions have either stagnated or declined for the workers who still do work in those industries. And of course, that's not the only problem facing the American working class. There's other issues like the opiate crisis. There were 20,000 deaths from opiate overdose in 1999, up to 90,000 in 2020. This is occurring in many of the same states where the manufacturing industry has been gutted. And then there's also things like the housing affordability crisis, which means that the dream of owning your own home, the so-called American dream, has become out of reach for millions of people. This was the context in which the 2016 presidential election unfolded. The candidate of the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton, was openly putting herself forward as the continuation of Obama in every way. Her message was essentially, everything is going great and we're going to keep going on this track. Trump, meanwhile, was saying there's a problem in society. He was saying you're angry and you should be angry. He was saying we need to drain the swamp of politicians in Washington, D.C. He displayed a clear fighting spirit and total contempt for the norms of the political establishment. And tapped into the anger, the legitimate anger of millions, and managed to win the presidency. Of course, Trump is part of the class that props up this establishment that he rails against. He's swindling people. He's not sincere, of course. But he manages to pose as someone who looks out for the average Joe. And since 2016, he's maintained this support and maintained this image he's created. As Yoel mentioned, the main responsibility for this lies on the labor leaders and the so-called left. Bernie Sanders, for instance, had the opportunity to cut across this poison. But in summer 2016, he absolutely could have launched a new party, which would have started with a significant base of support. It could have channeled the anti-establishment anger in a healthy direction. But instead, he capitulated to the Democrats and endorsed Clinton. That kind of approach will never defeat Trumpism. Only an independent working class alternative to the capitalist parties, emphasizing class issues, could undermine Trumpism and reframe this political polarization along class lines. In recent years, the comrades of the Revolutionary Communists of America have seen several glimpses of this possibility. Earlier this year, workers at the Molson Coors Brewery in Fort Worth, Texas, were striking for several weeks. Our comrades enthusiastically participated and supported their picket line and discussed our program and ideas with the workers. The workers at this factory were mainly Trump voters. But we got a friendly reception nonetheless. And the comrades noted that these workers largely viewed Trump as the lesser of two evils. And that's an important point to note because it's not just people who vote for Biden who are voting for the lesser of two evils. There's just as many who see Biden as the main evil and vote for Trump as a concession. Trump has a small reactionary core of very adamant supporters. But there's a larger layer of people who are primarily just dissatisfied with all options. And this is a global phenomenon. And so the comrades noticed that for these workers at the Molson Coors brewery, their main focus was not supporting Trump, but winning their strike. To be sure, we did not win any of them over to communist ideas in the short term. But they were open to hearing what we had to say. And it seems likely that Trump will win the 2024 election. Elections in the US are generally extremely close, so it's hard to say for sure. The ruling class has been trying to remove Trump from the situation, but it hasn't worked. He's not their preferred candidate. They see him as a destabilizing factor, as someone who's only looking out for his own personal whims and interests. But if anything, this actually bolsters his support, like Yola pointed out. But if he wins, it's going to be an educational experience for his base and for the whole working class. Because Trump is organically incapable of delivering on these bold promises he makes. When Trump says he's going to make America great again, it's very clear what he's referring to. He's referring to the post-World War II economic boom. But neither he nor any capitalist politician can magically bring that period back into existence. It was the product of a temporary alignment of factors. It was an exception to the norm, and it's not going to come back. So he got lucky and rode a wave of relative stability during his first term. But if he became president in January 2025 again, he would face a different situation. Crisis and instability are the new normal. The same economic situation that he currently blames Biden for would now become his responsibility. And this would happen in a context where the primary feature of the American political landscape is general hatred of the establishment and distrust of all institutions. A recent poll by the New York Times found that 70% of Americans either think the political system needs major reforms, or it needs to be, quote, torn down entirely. And so this is where consciousness is headed in the US. And the election of Trump would intensify all of these dynamics. We need to build a serious class struggle organization. A communist party. We need to win over the advanced workers and youth first. And through that, prepare to eventually win over broader layers of the working class. Because the working class, if united against these divisions, can become an unstoppable force that can overthrow the system that Trump and Biden both represent.
Thank you. After Johannes, I'll take Dina from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Yola, for your very instructive, very good report, lead off. I want to emphasize a characteristic of this phenomenon. This right populism is a form of government to bourgeoisie take a bigger part of the share plus value of the workers. That kind of the plus value expressed by the wages, the direct wages in the pocket of the workers, but also an indirectly wage paid by the public services. And the retired payments of the workers. In Brazil, we had our own experience with Jair Bolsonaro. His victory was prepared by some circumstances. The capitalist wanted a more share of this plus value. The government in that moment was unable to do what the capitalist wanted. And the government led by the left party of the Workers' Party. And the masses was more and more anger and insatisfied with this living of in the society. All this find expression in the demonstrations of 2013. a real insurrection of the masses. And this continued and expressed in a reactionary way in the parliamentary coup of 2016. Was a very confused process of struggle class. Because the government was the left, was the working party. Politics in Brazil. The decomposition of the traditional right, and the left going to the center to defend the system. Before this, we had a tragic confirmation of what we are discussing here. Of the problem of the lack of dialectic in the analysis. Was living a conservative way in the workers. And we entered in the fascist period of the society. We had other analysis. The election of Bolsonaro was an expression of the anger against the system. What failed was the reformist policies to the society. In the absence of a reference left, because the left was seen like as the system by the masses. The masses confused, voted for Bolsonaro. But I agree that the Bolsonaro is a weak government. The weak basis. But what did the right ideologies describe as populism? We should describe as a new kind of the Bonapartism government. Because Bolsonaro have weak bases, but he was supported by the sword. To apply the full program of the bourgeoisie. And this was a recipe of struggle class. The conclusions of the left have found his representatives. And our conclusions, just us. and looking what happened in the past periods of the elections, I was in the carnival after the elections. In that carnival, we call it Alto Bolsonaro Carnival. The fascism was spread from society. But the masses was painted and with funny clothes.
Ma in realtà quello che vediamo che sia stato è che le masse in questo carnevale erano
Calling to the overthrow the government.
e rivendicando il caduto del governo Bolsonaro.
And this was combined with the first measures of the government against his bases, electoral bases.
Questo si è combinato con le prime misure del governo contro la sua base elettorale.
And our analysis led us to put a slogan forward.
E la nostra analisi ci ha permesso di portare avanti questo slogan,
Bolsonaro out.
fuori Bolsonaro, fuori Bolsonaro.
And all the left was against us.
Tutta la sinistra era contro di noi,
Because his ideas and his analysis led them to the other conclusions.
perché le loro idee e le loro analisi li hanno portati alla conclusione opposta.
And other the politics also. 15. Okay. And but when we put this slogan into demonstrations, into the carnival, in the other demonstrations later,
Ma quando noi abbiamo portato avanti queste rivendicazioni a manifestazioni al carnevale successivo,
in the first moment the avant-garde,
all'inizio l'avanguardia,
but later more and more layers of the masses. Look at our slogan as an answer of these feelings.
guardando alle nostre rivendicazioni come una risposta ai loro sentimenti, al modo di sentire.
And push their leaders and their organizations to answer of the same way that us was answering.
E hanno fatto pressione sui leader di queste dirigenti e loro organizzazioni perché questa è la risposta che loro avevano dato noi.
And almost all the left was obligated to say something.
Quasi tutta la sinistra è stata sotto pressione perché dicessero qualcosa.
The five more biggest party of the left in Brazil published a declaration saying that was wrong call out Bolsonaro. But just us proposing this in the movement.
Ma eravamo solo noi a usare queste parole d'ordine nel movimento.
I think this show another question important in this discussion. To how we fight against these populist rights, representatives in government. With the United Front tactic. With this, even when we have a small group and propose ideas to the movement, these ideas could reach a huge impact and influence the masses. And we can have an impact, a political force much bigger than our organizational force. It's a tactical, it's not just the one tactical. This have to combine with our growth, our education, or own development of the numbers of the militants also. But it's a key to fight and defeat this new tactic of the bourgeoisie. Despite this, in Brazil, the left was able to block the way of the masses. It was not easy to them. But this, combined with the pandemic situation, it was very difficult in Brazil. Led to the masses to accept that the election was the way to continue his fight. We have now, we win this battle. We defeated these populists, representative of the bourgeoisie Bolsonaro. It was not a full victory. His followers was not smashed. And the following, we had not a socialist government. Lula is what the Third International described as a liberal worker government. That push on the bourgeoisie interests. Despite this, the struggle class continuing, and we are facing the attacks of this government against the workers in the very similar way line of the Bolsonaro was doing. And this kind of politics prepare a return of someone like Bolsonaro. And we need to prepare our forces to face this actual government or other kinds of the bourgeoisie government. In a liberal worker way of government, or in the populist Bonapartist way.
Okay, after Dina, I'll bring in Arturo from Portugal.
Hi, comrades. I wanted to discuss the Dutch situation. So I think many of you have heard the results of the elections we had in November. When Geert Wilders, the leader of the extreme right party, the PVV, it's the Party of Freedom, he won the election. And it's important to look at the context of the Netherlands to explain his victory. Because there's a deep economic crisis with high inflation without appropriate increase in wages, a pressing housing shortage, young people that have immense student debts that will carry with them for decades. and public services that just been hollowed out completely. So for decades, actually, there's been this stagnation in the country, and over the years, there's also been many scandals and issues in society. They are just not being solved. So in Dutch society, there's immense discontent and also a deep historically low distrust in the government and institutions. And so how did the left act in this situation? What did they provide? Well, the biggest party on the left is this new fusion party of the Labour Party and the Green Left. With Frans Timmermans at the head of it. And this is someone who comes from the right wing of the Labour Party and works in the EU Parliament as part of the climate accord. So he's literally the establishment, and it also shows what the party stands for, what the nature of it is. And then we have the Socialist Party, who once did play a progressive role in the early 2000s, but now completely watered down its politics and even took over some of the right-wing rhetoric. So it's basically regarded as an irrelevant party for young people. Then there's Bijeen, who lost its only seats in the parliament. And this followed from a few scandals that they had resulted from the poisonous identity politics in the party. Bijeen, another party, identity politics. So in this situation where the Dutch the working class is struggling to make ends meet, and deeply distrusts the government with no alternative on the left to be found. It's not surprising that more and more people are questioning the system. And right-wing demagogues were able to respond to this situation. They managed to fill the vacuum and capitalize on this by blaming migrants. So before the elections, we had Rutte as prime minister. He's from the VVD, a right-wing bourgeois party, and been the longest-standing prime minister. And they were in coalitions or had agreements with almost every party in the parliament. Other than the PVV and the BBB, which I will come back on later. So they are seen as the establishment that caused these many issues in society. And the working class is just now looking for something to kick the establishment, to kick these parties with. And the left is not able to provide that. So Wilders has managed to channel this discontent and to combine it with xenophobia, for example. Also anti-immigration politics and in general a racist campaign where the so-called Dutch people were put first. But then he also combined this with more social demands, like investment in healthcare, in education, in pensions as well. So in this demagogic way, Wilders was actually able to attract this part of the working class. But there's also another far-right party that rose to the top. Called the BBB, so the Farmers' People's Movement. And this is another party that actually, a new party that got formed in the midst of the farmers' protests. And they became quite popular as well. And they have a reactionary program, of course, with harsh immigration policy, and are for many cuts in different public sectors. However, it's not necessarily the content of the party that a lot of people resonated with. People associated the party with the farmers' protests. And these were different than protests that we had before, organized by left-wing organizations. They were militant. So they had strikes, even jailbreaks from arrested farmers, blocking highways for days. So these were the methods that the BBB got associated with. And it shows that the working class chose these methods to kick the establishment with. They are not looking for respectable politicians, but for hard fighters. And that's what the rise of the far right in the Netherlands shows, actually. Of course, these will not be the parties that are willing or even able to implement the promises they have. And this has already been exposed, because we just formed a government, or cabinet, with the PVV, the BBB, VVD and NSC. We have many parties. And the last two parties are just the bourgeois right-wing parties that were there. But now with an extra parliamentary prime minister at the top that the ruling class can actually trust, this is a top official that has been working in the secret services in the Netherlands. So we're in a situation where we have a technocratic government with the so-called experts in charge. So the ruling class, of course, don't want to collaborate with Wilders or the BBB. Because they are incredibly destabilizing factors in the country and outside. So they're in the process of kind of tame them down and normalize them. And it's already happening because after going into negotiations, They already said, well, we do have to be realistic about our demands and make compromises. So it's clear that they will get harshly exposed and discredited in the coming years. And this will accelerate an even more unstable situation in the Netherlands. And there are also many doom-thinking scenarios on the left, of course. So of where this government will take us. And many cry that fascism is on the rise in the Netherlands. But the rise of the right wing is just one side of the situation. On the other side, we saw huge strike waves, where in the last year we had the highest number of strikes in the last 50 years. The Palestine movement has also taken off in the Netherlands. Well, we had big demonstrations and encampments in universities, which is unprecedented in the Netherlands. And people see the amount of money and weapons being sent to Israel, to Ukraine. While also experiencing these many cuts from the government. And this starts to shift the consciousness of people in the Netherlands. So the student movement in solidarity with Palestine actually forced the biggest trade union to take a political stance. Against police violence and demonstration rights, for example. And we start to see more and more of these changes. And because of that, we will not fall into the pessimistic and cynicist mood of the liberals. We kind of regard the whole working class as a racist bloc. There are always some backwards elements in it, of course. But we look at these facts, and we can see that there's an actual anti-establishment sentiment in the country. And this government will radicalize young people even further. This is a layer that's looking for militancy. And we need to embrace these occasions and intervene with even more audacity. Among these students, among workers, and win them over politically. And they will be ready to build the Revolutionary Communist International. Thank you.
Okay. After Arturo, we'll take Nani.
Yeah.
You start.
Okay. So, bourgeois democracy is quite a fragile plant. And it can only flourish as it should under quite specific conditions of prosperity, growth, and general social stability, where class conciliation becomes possible. And this really has only happened in the most advanced capitalist countries, imperialist countries. Under ideal conditions, bourgeois democracy is meant to conceal the dictatorship of capital. Bourgeois politicians become transmission belts for the needs of the capitalists. And their task is to make the needs and the program of the ruling class more palatable and to justify it before the masses. Now, as I said, this can function smoothly under conditions of prosperity. But in times of crisis, this machinery starts to break down. And we see cracks opening up between the bourgeoisie and its political representatives. Because the bourgeois politicians, they have their own particular interests that do not entirely overlap with those of the ruling class. After all, their income and their privileges depend on them winning elections, getting elected into public office. And this becomes quite hard in conditions of polarization, of crisis, of generalized anger. And as Yola explained, it is in those periods that, the ground is prepared for demagoguery and so-called populism. And this opens, this generates tensions between the ruling class and its politicians. They become much more unpredictable. They put their own interests, their own narrow political interests ahead of those of their class. But at the same time, in a way, these right-wing populists are necessary to the ruling class. Or rather, this type of demagoguery becomes an inevitable precondition for the rule of capital in our epoch. Because yes, these demagogues, they're unpredictable, they generate more polarization, but at the same time, they divert popular anger away from the ruling class. They divide the working class, they distract it, they find scapegoats. So in a way, they are necessary in the conditions we are living in. And comrades, we must remember that the capitalism is an irrational system that is in a very deep crisis. It is sinking deeper and deeper. And the political and ideological superstructure of a system in deep crisis will inevitably become more irrational and more grotesque. And we will become increasingly reliant on all sorts of divisive questions, on scapegoats. that is the only way that, that a small minority that has completely outlived itself, a minority of parasites at the head of society, can maintain itself in power. Yes, the respectable bourgeois, they do not like this racism and this eccentric politicians. Economically, they need migrant labor. But politically, this type of politicians are necessary for them. The economic and the political needs of the system are entering into a growing contradiction and generating more instability. But really, as Yola explained, there is a much more immediate and tangible cause for the rise of these right-wingers. The first instinct of the masses after the 2008 crisis was to turn to the left on a healthy class basis. But with the rise of reformist leaders that betrayed the masses, this process, this turn to the left, hit a wall. And now we are seeing a much faster, actually. They'll end up applying the full program of the capitalists. We are seeing this, for instance, with Milei in Argentina right now. And this might take some time, but this will only prepare the ground for a more violent swing towards the left and the rise of new left reformist forces under different guises. The masses are looking for a way out, and this is creating a pendulum to the right and to the left, very violent swings in the mood. And our task is to smash that pendulum by going to the heart of the matter, to the root of the problem, which is capitalism. I'm done. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, after Nani, we'll take Franz.
Bueno, camaradas. Bueno, Vox es el partido de la extrema derecha en España.
Vox is the party of the extreme right in Spain.
Comparte características con otros movimientos similares, pero tiene sus propias características que hacen diferente su impacto en la clase obrera y en la lucha de clases en España.
It has similar characteristics to other movements, but it has certain peculiarities that impact the working class and the class struggle in Spain.
Lo más importante es que mientras en otros países estos movimientos tienen la apariencia de movimientos antisistema,
The biggest difference is that in other countries, these movements appear to be movements against the system.
Vox se presenta en España como el más firme defensor del establishment capitalista e imperialista español.
Meanwhile, Vox in Spain presents itself as the firmest defender of the establishment of imperialism and of Spanish capitalism.
en particular de la monarquía borbónica, de la Iglesia Católica, ¿no? y del aparato del Estado.
It particularly defends the Bourbon monarchy, the Catholic Church, and the state apparatus.
Vox surge de una escisión del partido tradicional de la derecha española, el Partido Popular, en 2014.
Vox emerged from a right-wing split from the traditional conservative right-wing party of Spain, the Popular Party.
Y solo adquiere un desarrollo significativo a partir de 2018, tras la derrota del movimiento revolucionario independentista catalán.
That split happened in 2014, but it really only rose to prominence in 2018 after the defeat of the Catalan independence referendum.
Tras la frustración con Podemos en las masas,
It benefited from frustration among the masses with Podemos,
y tras el descrédito del partido de la derecha tradicional, el Partido Popular, que perdió el gobierno en 2018 a manos del Partido Socialista.
and because of the discrediting of the Popular Party that was thrown out of government, defeated by the Socialist Party.
Sus banderas son fundamentalmente la lucha contra el separatismo catalán y vasco y contra la inmigración, particularmente de origen magrebí.
The main banner of Vox is against separatism on the part of the Catalans and the Basque, and also against immigration, particularly Moroccans.
Justifican, aunque no la defienden abiertamente por miedo a crear un movimiento de oposición muy fuerte, pero justifican todos los crímenes del franquismo y ante los ojos de las masas aparecen como defensores de la dictadura de Franco.
They also make excuses and downplay Franco's crimes, although they don't openly embrace fascism, but the masses see them as apologists for Franco.
Su base social son pequeños propietarios y empresarios, justamente los que más mano inmigrante emplea.
The social base of Vox is small business owners and small proprietors who are precisely the class that employ a lot of migrant labor.
La clase media reaccionaria, policía, el ejército y sectores de la Iglesia Católica.
Also, the reactionary layers of the middle class, police,
El ejército y la Iglesia Católica.
the army, and the Catholic Church as well.
Su apoyo en la clase obrera es pequeño,
It has very little support among the working class,
salvo en sectores altos, ¿no? o periféricos,
except
o sea, bien pagado en sectores.
except for some sections of the very well-paid, higher levels of the class.
Su bandera, digamos, la lucha contra el progresismo, el feminismo, ¿no? y la cultura de izquierda.
They have an image of fighting against progressivism, feminism, the influence of the left.
Aunque están contra el derecho al aborto, no se atreven a defender con énfasis su eliminación por miedo a provocar al movimiento.
They're against the right to abortion, but they don't really put this demand forward so prominently because they're afraid of provoking a mass response.
Su modelo económico no es el estatalismo burgués, sino el ultraliberalismo.
Their economic model is not bourgeois
Estatalismo. Estatalismo y el-
statism, but rather extreme neoliberalism.
A diferencia de la extrema derecha, por ejemplo, en Francia o Italia, donde se nutren de sectores plebeyos, entre comillas,
In contrast to the extreme right in countries like France and Italy that are nourished by sections of like plebeian working class,
Vox se nutre de sectores de la clase media alta y de la burguesía.
Vox rests on sections of the middle class and the bourgeoisie.
Y es visto por la clase trabajadora como enemigos de clase.
And the workers see Vox as a class enemy.
Son prosionistas, chocando con la mayoría de la población española.
Prosionistas. Okay.
Prosionistas, por a favor de Israel.
Oh,
Prosionistas.
they're pro-Zionist.
Y provocan un odio y reacción igual y en sentido contrario en la clase trabajadora, ¿no?
And they provoke a lot of rejection and hatred on the part of the working class against them.
Hay límites muy claros para la penetración de Vox en el corazón de la clase obrera española.
There are very serious limitations for Vox's ability to to penetrate into the heart of the working class.
porque representa todo lo que ésta odia y en particular sus capas avanzadas.
Because Vox represents everything that the working class hates, particularly the advanced layers.
El franquismo, las políticas propatronales,
Franquismo, the pro-boss, pro-corporate policies,
la incultura, la violencia machista,
lack of culture, sexist violence,
el nacionalismo español y la monarquía.
Spanish nationalism, the monarchy.
Por eso nunca podrán arraigar en las masas de la clase obrera,
That's why they will never be able to sink roots in the working class.
y cualquier avance suyo preparará una radicalización hacia la izquierda muy peligrosa para la clase dominante.
And any step forward that they take will only provoke a radicalization of the class struggle.
Por eso la burguesía española está alarmada ante una eventual coalición de gobierno futura entre el Partido Popular y Vox.
That's why the ruling class is growing alarmed about the possibility of an electoral coalition between Vox and the Popular Party.
Hecho constatable de que el capitalismo para existir necesita del trabajo asalariado.
The optimism of the Marxist grows out of the irrefutable fact that capitalism requires the wage labor of the working class.
Incluso en las peores condiciones en que este trabajo se realiza, ¿no? De crisis, de degradación moral, etc.
And analyzing the conditions that this process takes place, conditions of crisis, demoralization.
Por lo tanto, digamos, los trabajadores necesitarán siempre, tarde o temprano, agruparse
And this is why sooner or later the workers will always find themselves forced to join together
para defenderse
to defend themselves,
y que inevitablemente desarrollarán una conciencia de oposición a sus patrones.
and they will inevitably develop a consciousness of opposition against the interests of the bosses.
Una conciencia de clase,
Class consciousness.
de que se levantarán y lucharán.
They will stand up and they will fight.
Esta es la base material del optimismo comunista.
This is the material base of communist optimism.
El límite al avance hegemónico social, ¿no? De la ultraderecha no es solamente una cuestión de números, de la fuerza de la clase obrera y de la debilidad de la pequeña burguesía.
The limitations, the objective limitations for the advance of the right are not just a question of numbers.
Son también sus valores morales y de clase.
It's also clashes with the values and the class interests of the working class.
Los valores de la ultraderecha son la apelación individual,
The right wing, the values of the right wing appeals to individual rights,
el egoísmo,
egoism,
el desinterés por el sufrimiento de los demás,
not caring about the suffering of others,
la opresión sobre otros,
oppression over others,
el individuo desgajado de su clase.
the individual broken off from their class.
Ideas que solo pueden incidir fundamentalmente en la pequeña burguesía.
These are ideas that really can only resonate fundamentally with the middle class.
Pero los valores de la clase obrera son colectivos.
But the values of the working class are collective.
La solidaridad y el apoyo mutuo,
Solidarity and mutual support,
la sensibilidad hacia la injusticia y la opresión,
sensitivity to injustice and oppression,
relaciones personales desinteresadas,
desinteresadas, a disinterest in personal relations,
sin interés.
open, genuine social relations,
Y sobre todo la movilización de masas que siempre arrinconan estas tendencias individualistas e irracionales.
and it's always the mobilization of the masses that forces these individualist tendencies to one side.
Las condiciones materiales condicionan los valores morales e ideológicos, tarde o temprano.
Sooner or later, material conditions shape the ideological forces,
Y los valores de la ultraderecha, que son los valores capitalistas extremos,
and the values of the right wing that are extreme capitalist values,
chocan con las condiciones de vida de la clase obrera, inevitablemente,
they inevitably clash with the living conditions of the working class,
y generarán una reacción en sentido contrario.
and they'll generate an opposite reaction.
Esto no quiere decir que debamos adoptar una posición conformista y pasiva,
This doesn't mean that we should adopt a passive conformist position,
diciendo que no importan los avances temporales de la ultraderecha o anunciando su fracaso inevitable.
we shouldn't dismiss the advances of the right wing or announce its inevitable failure.
Hasta el enemigo más débil puede vencer si no se le opone una resistencia.
Even the weakest enemy can be victorious if there's no opposition against them.
De lo que se trata es de que inspiremos nuestra lucha contra la ultraderecha con este optimismo de clase,
But what we have to do is inspire our struggle against the right wing with this optimism,
que nace de la confianza en la clase misma,
an optimism born out of confidence in the class itself,
en la confianza de que su conciencia se forjará a través de sus condiciones de vida y de sus experiencias de lucha.
confidence that its consciousness will be forged in its life experience and in the experience of the struggle.
Se trata de imbuirnos del optimismo que nace de la conciencia de combatir en el lado correcto de la historia.
We have to be imbued with the confidence that comes from fighting on the right side of history.
El optimismo de que nuestra lucha y nuestra clase son invencibles.
Confidence that our class and our struggle are invincible.
El optimismo de que combatiremos y venceremos.
The optimism that we will fight and we will win.
Thank you. After Franz, we'll take Niklas.
So, comrades, I'd like to talk about the AfD, the alternative for Germany. As you know, last weekend there were the European elections, and I would say it was a victory for the AfD. In the whole of Germany, they got 16%. Which, but they were the second strongest party after the Conservatives. But I think what is even more relevant is that the parties of the current current coalition, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, had huge losses. Huge losses. And in some eastern German federal states where the AfD is particularly strong, it looks more extreme, like in Saxony, in the state of Saxony. The AfD got 43%. First, like the being the biggest party. The second party are the Conservatives with 23%, so a 20 percentage point difference in between. And the third party is another demagogic populist party. I don't have time to explain it. And that's it. These are the only, if this would be a state election, these three parties would be the only ones who come into parliament, that get into parliament. I'm sure those parliament debates would be quite entertaining. No, but getting back to the serious point here, this is a huge defeat and a huge victory for the AfD after what? After half a year of attacks, and more attacks of the liberal establishment, of the bourgeois politicians against the AfD. Yola mentioned that already. They were trying to have a huge media scandal about alleged Russian and Chinese spies within the AfD. They used not all they could, but a lot of resources from the state, from the media, from like... sorry. And it didn't help. They got humiliated, and the Social Democratic Party got the worst result they ever got with 13.9%. Olaf Scholz's party.
Pero todo esto fue en vano, porque fueron estos humillados, sobre todo el Partido Socialdemócrata, que solo obtuvo un 13,9%.
Why does the ruling class don't like them? I think Yola did a good job of explaining that. They are anti-EU and pro-Russia. That's not good for German capital. They are unreliable. But now this progressive bourgeoisie, the liberals, the social democrats and the Greens, try to portray themselves as the big fighters against the right. The defenders of democracy, the big defenders of democracy. This is a huge mockery, obviously, because they are quite anti-democratic when it touches the interest of the ruling class. And they are very contradictory. 2 weeks ago, some posh kids in the island of Sylt sang like racist slogans at a party, Germany to the Germans. And there was this huge scandal, like how can that happen? A week later, some poor mentally deranged Afghan guy stabbed a police officer in Mannheim. And then the media for a week at least was full of, we have to deport to Afghanistan, we have to deport to Afghanistan, by the same people, by the same politicians. Also, the repression against the Palestine movement shows very clearly that those defenders of democracy are not defenders of democracy at all, that they are very hypocritical. For example, the Liberal Party now said democratic rights only for German people. Foreigners should not be allowed to have demonstrations. With liberals like this, who needs right-wing populists? And the hypocrisy also becomes clear in how they treat the AfD. They treat the AfD in a very undemocratic way. A high-ranking, civil servant of the government who is responsible for East Germany. His name is Marco Wanderwitz, and his surname translates to walking joke, which is very true. He says he's convinced that not a small part of the electorate don't have good intentions with our democracy. Naughty boys and girls. And that's why he wants to make the AfD illegal. He said we have to make the AfD illegal. Because, he says, with political methods alone, we will not get rid of them. I thought democracy was supposed to be the free market of ideas and so on. Obviously, it's not. And the point is, of course, the masses see all this, and this hypocrisy is open for everyone to see, and that's why yeah, why it didn't help at all. It doesn't help at all. It discredits the ruling regime, so to speak. Why did the AfD rise to the successes they have recently? I think also that was explained very well in the lead-off. First of all, who is responsible? First of all, the establishment parties and the ruling class that did austerity and attacks on the living standards of the masses for 30 years. The AfD consists, I think, mainly of petty bourgeois who are afraid of decline of social decline caused by inflation, energy prices, Russo-Ukrainian war, and so on. And secondly, who is responsible is the reformists, obviously, the leaders of the workers' movement. The SPD completely enacts the program of financial capital. Now, Die Linke, the left, some of you might remember. Especially in the east of Germany, they used to be the mass workers' party because it was like the old rest of the GDR. And after 2008 and in the early 2010s, after the Occupy movement, after the financial crisis in Greece and so on in Europe, they gained support. And even in the West, there was some movement in there, some momentum. They gained momentum. They got certain electoral successes. But they used all this not to wage a fight against capitalism, against the government, against the attacks. But only to get well-paid jobs in the state, in state governments, and so on. And now that they declined, they had 2.9%, I think, in the European election. 2.93. So this also cannot represent a radical opposition from the left, a radical alternative to the status quo. And I talked about the east of Germany. The AfD is the strongest there. After the GDR was unified with Germany, annexed, I would like to say. The Western German ruling class basically took all the machines and factories and carried them out of the country to somewhere else and left it deindustrialized. So infrastructure, living standards are shit, like whole biographies of a whole generation of people was completely destroyed. What did the mighty German Trade Union Federation do in this time, 90s and early 2000s? They helped. They basically helped carrying out all the machines out of the country, cutting the jobs, closing the factories. in this climate, it's very obvious. I mean, if the AfD is the only opposition, seems to be the only opposition, you can see how they gain support. And they are the only party in the German parliament who criticizes the Ukraine war, Germany's involvement in the Ukraine war against Russia. The only one. This year, in autumn, we will have state elections in 3 Eastern German states, Thuringia, Saxony, and Brandenburg. These are the states where the AfD is strongest, and they might very well be the strongest power in 1 or 2 of these elections, or all 3 of them even. And we might, and of course now there is a lot of pressure, for example, on Die Linke, on the left party, which is still a little bit big in Thuringia, to work with the bourgeois parties. For example, to go into a coalition with the conservatives to prevent the AfD. Of course, we have to resist this, as Yola explained. That is not the way we fight the AfD, that's the way we make the AfD stronger. But the key thing is we could very well have a major constitutional crisis, state crisis in 1 or 2 of those Eastern German states, because it's not possible to build a coalition. And the masses and the youth are watching this. The rise of the right, the hypocrisy of the bourgeois politicians and defenders of democracy, and all of that spectacle. And that has a relevant impact on their consciousness that we can connect with. Thank you.
Okay, Nicholas will be the next speaker. We'll see how much time we have after he's finished.
He was flashing red for a little bit there. Fran's contribution made me think of a poem by Bertolt Brecht. It's called The Solution. I'll just read the last lines. Would it not be easier in that case for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? I'm sure that's how a lot of the bourgeois politicians feel about the situation right now. Trotsky made a related point in one of his writings. He said that the power of finance capital is not such that it at any point can impose a government of its liking. It doesn't possess that power. Its strength lies in that any government, as long as it doesn't expropriate the means of production, basically hand the power to the working class, will inevitably, in the last analysis, have to defend the interest of finance capital. And I think that kind of explains some of the situation that we face at the moment. Obviously, he was talking here referring to the 1930s and fascism. But these forces that we are talking about, there is a parallel, or there are similarities. Trotsky was also very critical of those who exaggerated the threat of fascism. He says that this leads inevitably to political mistakes. And we can see today how this is exaggerating the threat of fascism leads to the political mistake of lesser evilism. By whipping up a hysteria of, oh, the fascists are coming, the fascists are coming. And this is what they're doing in Germany now. They're basically trying to push the working class electorate to accept any old, to vote for the bourgeois parties or the social democrats and so on, which are parties they hate. And this kind of policy is a disaster for the labor movement or for the left. But obviously allows the bourgeois to buy themselves some time in order to prepare the ground. It's not the first time in history that this kind of development takes place, this question of lesser evilism. In fact, in the years leading up to to Hitler taking power, this was the policy of the Social Democrats in Germany. Every ministry before leading up to the Hitler was becoming progressively more right-wing. They even, it stepped over the mark and basically became a half dictatorship. Bourgeois dictatorship. What we would call Bonapartism. But every step of the way they had the support of the Social Democrats. And that, in combination with the ultra-leftism of the Communist Party at that time, was what prepared the way for Hitler to take power. And you can read in Trotsky's writings throughout the period that he was extremely critical about this policy. A few years later, he wrote about a similar development in France. And he described a similar phenomena where the petty bourgeoisie lose trust in their political representatives. Basically, the center ground was disappearing. And in the case of France, this was the Radical Party, which had been the party of stabilizing the republic. But its support was melting away. It did not have a base in society. Much like the traditional liberals or conservatives in Germany lost their base of support. In France, it wasn't just the Social Democrats who were trying to prop them up. But in France, this is 1936 or so, right? The Communist Party, you know, they had done a 180-degree turn, and now they were supporting the Popular Front. So the Communist Party, the Social Democrats, they were all trying to prop up the center ground, or the radicals. And so you can see precisely the same problem. You have this situation where the petty bourgeoisie are losing their faith in the system. And what is needed is the working class to show a way out. Preparing the way to revolution and overthrowing of capitalism. But the parties of the working class, instead of doing that, they try to prop up the status quo that everyone hates. And the consequence is that they get discredited along with the system as a whole. There's another quote where Trotsky talks about democracy. And he repeated this quote in his last writing, so he must have thought it was a good one. He says, "There's no epoch in human history so saturated with antagonisms as ours. And he talks about the tension that exists in European society. And he says that under such high tension, the fuses of democracy blow out. And hence you have the short circuit of dictatorship. And that is what we are, in a certain sense, we see some of that taking place now. We can see how there is now constant pressure to remove democratic rights and so on. But there is also some important differences. So although we see that on one hand, there's another process on the other hand. And that is the fact that today what is keeping the system afloat is the leadership of the working class. The capitalism needs the leadership of trade unions in particular in order to stabilize the situation for them. So they cannot go on a full frontal attack against the trade unions. It would be like sawing off the branch that they were sitting on. The class balance of forces in society are completely different to what they were in the 1930s. And the ruling class is aware of that. You could see it in Britain, for example, when it came to the Palestine demonstrations. Well, we had the Ministry of the Interior, or Home Secretary as they call it. She was telling the police to attack the demonstrations. Basically ban the demonstrations, that's what she was saying. Now, she's meant to be in charge of the police. They're meant to listen to what she says. But just said, no, we can't do that. We're not doing that. That's not legal. Like the police care about things like the law. But it was clear that the bourgeoisie were telling them, look, don't listen to what she's saying. And I mean, just think about it. Imagine they mobilized all the 40,000 police officers or something to London. And they had them attack a demonstration of 500,000 people. They probably would have managed to dissolve the demonstration. But they would have, the whole city would have been up in arms. They'd be fighting on every street in the whole city with small groups of protesters. There'd be riots in the whole city. Basically, there was no way they could suppress these demonstrations, even if they wanted to. And it's just one example of the class balance of forces. I would say there's another thing about fascism. We do see some fascist attacks at the moment. But they're relatively limited in scope. They are occasional and so on, and often met by some response. There was the very instructive example in Greece, where the fascists attacked and killed a hip-hop artist. And it led to an uprising of the whole neighborhood. And suddenly the state felt obliged to arrest not just the fascists responsible for this crime, but the leadership of the party, Golden Dawn. Because of the pressure, they were worried what was going to happen if they did not take action against these fascists. There's another example in Sweden, where the fascists were constantly provoking. For a couple of years, they were constantly provoking, attacking demonstrations and so on. Then they called a demonstration in Gothenburg. There's going to be a show of force. I think they mobilized about 500 people. By mobilizing all the fascists in the whole of Scandinavia. But workers and, had enough of these fascists. So more or less spontaneously, 20,000 counter-protesters gathered. The police erected some barriers to keep them apart. But the counter-protesters removed the barriers and started marching against the fascists. And then the police decided, well, it's better to keep the fascists away, so hold them here. And the fascist idiots, they started fighting with the police. And they got soundly beaten by the police. And then they disappeared for a couple of years. They completely disappeared from Sweden. It also gives you like a sense of the balance of forces once the working class and the young people mobilize against these groups. So it's important that we remember the strength that we have behind us. the immense power of the working class, not just in the 1930s, but the immense, much more strengthened working class that we have today. And when it's mobilized, it's capable of sweeping away all of these right-wingers with no problem at all. And the real battle is to win over the working class, to win them to a correct program, to give them the leadership that they deserve, and consign capitalism and these forces to history.
Okay, thanks very much, Nicholas, and all comrades for contributing. I'll pass to Yola now to sum up the discussion for 20 minutes.
Yes, thank you for all the contributions. And I think this is really what this kind of discussion needs. To have more concrete examples and in-depth examples of the process today. We really live in the age of imperialist decay. And you can see it everywhere. But I thought it was very interesting how Bryce described what is it doing to the imperialist centers. The previously stable imperialist countries. How this tendency of imperialism where finance capital becomes more and more important. And this process of outsourcing industrial jobs undermines sectors of the working class in these countries like destabilizes the situation of the whole system. And there's also this process. These were the layers that the traditional, the trade unions and the workers' parties leaned on. This was the basis. This labor aristocracy. But the working conditions in the industry or the deindustrialization completely undermines this as well. And this means that these old leaders, reformist leaders of the unions and the parties, they get completely divorced from the feeling of the working class, the lives, even more. There is also this question of migration. Migrant workers coming into the country, taking bad jobs, badly paid jobs. And they're often not unionized. But we see how even in these layers of the working class, now there's a radicalization and an organization drive happening in the last years. A part of the working class that is not used to those old traditions of the reformists. And who also mostly cannot vote. in Vienna, I mean, 33%, more than a third, like a third of the voters in the voting age cannot, they cannot vote, they're not voters. Which we also have to consider when we think about this rise of the right wing. They appeal to a big section of the working class. They can never be represented by them, basically. But this creates a situation where, as was described, that you go to a picket line and then you meet Trump voters there. And that is that generally. We also notice in Austria, the social partnership, the social democracy is very strong, like has very deep roots in the workers' movement. But the same workers that in the workplace go around with Freedom Party merchandise are not the strike breakers. They want to fight, but they're very critical of this reformist social partnership leadership of the trade unions. So this is another thing, how this the imperialist decline, it really undermines the old stability in every way. And you see how unions get pressurized. There are cracks in this union leadership, and then the U.S. Union leaders like Sean Fain come to the top. And so finance capital, who rules society as we know, they have a bit of a difficult situation with all these pillars of stability melting away. Nicholas said the financial capital, they cannot handpick their representatives as they want. It doesn't work like that. They cannot put all their eggs in one basket either. In some way, they need these right-wing demagogues even, as was explained by Arturo. In other cases, they try to arrange with them, as with Gerd Wilders. And some just we see now, like oil bosses, but even Silicon Valley bosses, tentatively supporting Trump, donating big chunks of money. Work with what they have. And I'm saying this because these splits in the ruling class, they are important that we see them. There is an own logic of there are different interests within the ruling class as well. For example, Franz correctly said that the big finance capital in Germany, they are full on board with the Ukraine war now. But actually, being cut off of Russian energy is not very good for a lot of industrial capitalists in Germany. And then also the parties, as was explained in the discussion, the different parties of the bourgeoisie, they have their own interests and their own logic. And that means there is, as was explained, there's also a difference between the political immediate need of certain parties and the general needs of big chunks of capitalism. So we cannot have a mechanical, economistic view of how these crises develop. We cannot calculate, oh, the finance capital needs this program, ergo this will happen in politics and society. And I think really a Marxist masterpiece of understanding this dialectics of politics and economy is Marx's writing on class struggle in France, 1848 to 1850. But when we read this book, we have to think that this was before the imperialist stage of capitalism. Which brings a little, a few peculiarities to today's situation. It's a change. It's a news that the highest stage of capitalism. It's not the same as the early stages of bourgeois democracy, basically. And as Lenin wrote, like imperialism wants, I don't know the English translation, imperialism wants rule and not freedom. It wants oppression, not freedom. So in imperialist crises, especially, there is this tendency of using the state apparatus and using the repressive machine more and more. Yeah, so you could say, yeah, there is this general tendency towards, I don't know, military dictatorship or Bonapartism. Yeah, there's this direction of the process. Bonapartism being the rule of the sword, which bases itself on using the military and the police to balance between the classes and rule with iron fist. But today is not the 1930s, as Nicholas explained. There are important differences between then and now. The biggest difference being the strength of the working class, even if it's only in potential because of the leaders. So we cannot say that populism is just a weaker form of Bonapartism or something like that. We cannot substitute a bourgeois imprecise term with a Marxist term and have the same schematic approach to the real world process. Which is why I found it very helpful to have all these different examples from different countries. When we looked at these examples, right, we have to differentiate between reformists and right-wing demagogues. They are similar in the sense the same process of brings left reformists to the top, and brings right demagogues can bring them to the top. Both, they are similar in the sense that both give illusionary answers to the problems, one by promising a rational, Keynesianist or whatever program for the workers, being the left reformists. And the other side, the right-wing demagogues, bringing racist, demagogic, completely divisive seeming solutions to the problem. But these are different things. We have to look at the class forces they unleash and then they lean on. what class processes they strengthen. Nani also explained this. Petty bourgeois ideology has a completely different meaning than like the thinking of the working class when it acts collectively. And we have most of all to see like these left reformists or whatever, they give the chance for workers to have some class struggle experience, even if it ends in a defeat. So these are different phenomena. To put them together, I mean, it's a bit like when Trotsky criticized the social fascism theory of the Stalinists. Yeah, both help finance capital to be in power. But it's a complete mistake to say like, we fight against the social democracy, same as we fight against the fascists. So this also means we have to have a very concrete approach to what is the situation in the different countries, right? The tactical approach. A comrade talked about the United Front. And the idea of the United Front is you put practical demands on the leaders of other reformist parties. You put practical work, suggest practical work, in order to expose them and win the workers over. So it's a strategy to grow as the revolutionaries, and not to put all left wings together to have a left wing unity or something like that. But even this, it's easy to say, yeah, we need United Front. Because we need to combat the reformists, so we can have a class struggle and defeat the right wing. But here again, there are no schemas that we can apply. If we look at Germany, as Franz explained, you can see how completely hypocritical and disgusting the social democracy is in this government, the biggest warmongering government since World War II. How they abuse this talk of democracy, save democracy, and so on. And the best work is to see through that, and the right wingers just hate them for it. So the comrades, when they went to these big demonstrations, Save Democracy Against the Right, we went to these demonstrations. They put on their banners, against AfD, against the government, against capital. So directly attacking the government that has the social democracy in it. Which is correct. But in Spain, when Nani explained the character of Vox, and the right wing just tried to oust the socialist Prime Minister Sanchez, and the state apparatus and the right wing have this Francoist path to go to demonstrations there and go like, kick out Sanchez, kick out Vox. That would be completely sectarian and wrong. Similarly, in the US, we talked about the dangers of lesser evilism, how it's wrong to support Biden against Trump. But this Sean Fain, this leader of the Auto Workers Union, the new one, who has brought forward some good practical steps for the workers that will help them gain some experiences. He supports Biden. And we criticize this. We say this is wrong. But also we would not say, down with Sinn Féin, this is like, this is the end, like he's a traitor now. So what I'm trying to say with all this, we have a deep, deep crisis. The general tendencies are the same everywhere. And we can see them and have to understand them. We have to have a class position when we fight against the right and the whole system. We have a line of demarcation of working together with liberals and other parts of the bourgeoisie. But this is only the beginning of thinking, you know. We all have to think. What does it mean for the tactic in each section, in each country? Trotsky had this analogy in the 30s, where he said, like, in this situation of sharp turns, the Workers' Party, the party is like driving a car upside a hill with very like strong curves, left and right turns. And you have to know which gear to put in order to get up the hill. If you don't, you just either roll back or like right off the cliff. So, with this perspective, we know we have a period of class struggle coming in before us. Of weak governments, not strong ones. And we need to get prepared to intervene in this process, to intervene, to win over the best workers and youth with the correct tactics and work we do, based on a deep Marxist analysis of the object situation. And this will ensure that we can go with all the turns towards revolution, a successful revolution. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Yola, and thanks all comrades for contributing. We're going to finish the morning session now, and we'll break for 2 hours. And for comrades watching at home, we'll be back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Italian time. Could other comrades wait, though? We've got an important announcement, but we can finish the stream. So thank you, everyone.